Hi, it's Judy. Welcome back to my channel. I've been away for a little while and I thought I'd like to explain why I've been away for a little while, and I need to do my makeup, so I thought I would do it while I'm talking to you, and we'll see where this video takes us. So I've got a couple of products that I haven't used on video before, but I've been using them for a little while, and I will have, hopefully, if I can find the footage, I will have a video that will explain exactly what it is that I'm using and how much I'm enjoying it. I will try and put up photographs of each of the products as I use them here, so that you've got an idea of what I'm working with. So I'm going to start with the Studio Primer from Oxx and Oxx Studio, and this is a brand that I found when I was on holiday in Australia. And the only thing that I will say, when I get that video up, you'll get a proper impression of the primer itself, but the one thing that I will say for it is that it is a stupid design on the packaging, because it is a pump tube that requires you to put it upside down in order to get any product out of it. So it just doesn't work as a functional piece of packaging. But the primer itself is not too bad. Okay, so let's now explain why I've been absent for a bit. And I do have to apologise profusely. And I'll hopefully explain in this video where I see my channel going in the future as well, if I remember. Okay, so some of you may know that I went on holiday to Australia. I went home to my hometown of Perth in Western Australia last July and August. Well, half of July and all of August. And I went out with my daughter, and after 4 weeks of the holiday, I knew that my husband was coming out to join us for the final 3 weeks. And the whole way through the holiday, I'd been having real problems with my back. It was killing me. It was stopping me from sleeping, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. I suffer from restless leg syndrome, genetically inherited, so all of us have problems with our legs, and it's how do I explain restless leg syndrome? It usually happens, it occurs for me, it happens later in the evening on a normal day, and it's my legs just start to, we used to call them walkie legs, because it makes you feel as though you want to get up and walk, but actually getting up and walking by that point doesn't help at all. It makes it worse for me. I know that my uncle, when he suffers from it, he goes for a run, and that sorts him out. And various other siblings have got other solutions. But the best way, when it gets really bad, the best way that I can explain it is if you imagine what it would be like having fire ants crawling up and down inside your legs, biting you. That's probably the best way that I can explain how it feels for me. There was a fascinating documentary on Channel 4, I think, not that long ago, which talked about restless leg syndrome, and there are people out there who suffer from it far worse than I do, and they have all the sympathy in the world. Anyway, I digress. My restless legs were kicking up, my back was hurting me, and I was finding that I was going to bed at about the normal time, somewhere around 10:30, 11 o'clock each night, and I would fall asleep until about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then my restless legs would kick in and my back was hurting, and I would then stay awake until 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, to the point where I was then so exhausted that I would fall asleep. And that meant then that I didn't wake up again until 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. So by the time I'd got up and was functioning again, our days were half gone, and I just wasn't enjoying the holiday. And it occurred to me that my husband, who has precious holiday time, would be coming out to spend most of his holiday allowance, and he wouldn't want to be spending the mornings lying in bed waiting for me to get up, or he'd want to be up, and we'd be wanting to go and do things as a family to actually have our holiday. And so I thought, okay, well, what can I do about this? Well, I'd had back treatment here in the UK with the NHS, and they'd sent me off to a physiotherapist who'd been doing back manipulation and massage and stuff, and it had kind of been helping, but the problem wasn't getting any better. All of the things that were happening were just kind of staving off the problems. Okay, I'm going to move on to foundation now, and the foundation that I'm using this morning is from E.L.F, and it's their oil-free SPF 15 sunscreen. The one thing I will say for any foundation that you come across that has a sunscreen in it, if you're in a situation where you really need a sunscreen, don't rely on the sunscreen in your foundation. Put a sunscreen underneath your foundation. And if you're in Australia, I found that Mecca have a really nice face sunscreen that is specifically designed nice and light, not like a body sunscreen. It is actually nice and light for the skin, and it didn't break me out. Anyway, so I got to this point where I was thinking, this is not going to be good. This is not going to work for the other half when he comes out. So what are we going to do? So one of my sisters had quite a lot of success going and seeing a chiropractor about her restless leg syndromes. So long story short, I contacted a chiropractor and asked if they could do anything for me, and he said yes, he could. He had several people on his patients who had restless leg syndrome, and he'd be more than happy to have a look. So he called me in for an appointment and ran a few gadgets up and down my spine, and said some mumbo jumbo about things not connecting up, and I kind of like, okay, fine, whatever. And he said, but before we can go any further, what I want to do is I want to do an X-ray. And that was a bit of a shock to me, because here in Britain, chiropractors are treated as though they're total utter quacks. And I haven't yet seen, I don't know of anyone who's been able to have an X-ray done at their chiropractors. I know that chiropractors have referred people for X-rays, but never actually at the chiropractors. So I was like, okay, that's fine. Let's do an X-ray and have a look and see what's going on. And he called me back in the following day, and he said, I'm a bit concerned. He said, I've had a look at your X-ray, and I've spoken to a radiographer friend of mine. He said, you have to remember, I'm a PhD, not an MD, so I am a doctor, but not a medical doctor, and you need to get yourself to a GP to have some tests done. I have some concerns. So he put my X-ray of my skeleton upside against a healthy skeleton. And he said, look, I'm just going to look at the pelvis area here because that's the clearest. He said, if you have a look across your pelvis here, can you see how it's all mottled and patchy? And this one here is all smooth and relatively smooth and even. And I said, yes, I can see that. And he said, well, there's some concerns over why that is. And I really think you should go and talk to a GP about it. And I said, well, give it to me straight. What are the possibilities? What could it be? He said, well, I don't want to scare you, but there is a possibility that it's cancer. And he said, my radiographer friend of mine who had a look at this suggested that it might be bowel cancer. And I was kind of, okay, you just knock me over with a feather by this point. But he said, he hastened. He said, I am not a GP. You need to go and have some tests done. So I found a GP who I had actually worked with when I was out there and found myself pregnant with my daughter back in 2009. And she sat me down and she said, okay, she had a look at the X-rays and she said, yes, I can see why there might be some concerns. So she said, I'm going to send you for some blood tests, and then I'd like you to go and have a CT scan. So the blood tests were done that day and she got the results back. The CT scan was scheduled for the following Wednesday. And the blood tests came back. She phoned me and she said, right, there's some real concerns here. There are definitely cancer markers showing in your bloods. We need to work out, need to try and pinpoint and work out where this cancer is and how serious it is. So she said, I want you to go for the CT scan as we've got planned. But she said, your red blood cell count is very low. And this was now, my husband had arrived by this point. And we were now 16, 17 days away from coming back to the UK. She said, but I need you to go and have this blood, I need you to go and, we need to get you an iron infusion to get your red blood cell count back, because she said, I'm amazed that with a red blood cell count as low as you currently have, that you didn't pass out on the plane coming over from England. And the only thing that I can put that down to is either good luck or the fact that I had done the non-stop flight from Heathrow to Perth, called the Dreamliner. Really good service. If you're ever wanting to fly from Heathrow to Perth, use the Dreamliner. It's amazing. 17 hours without having to stop, which some people sit there and go, 17 hours, But if you take into account that it's 22 hours if you fly via somewhere, and you end up having 3 hours stopping over, if you have to traipse a 9-year-old or any age child through a airport for 3 hours and then get back onto a plane, and then you've got to try and get them to sleep and all of it, the 17 hours on the Dreamliner was so much better. Anyway, but the Dreamliner, they say that they are pumping more oxygen into the system to compensate for, because they're more afraid of deep vein thrombosis the longer the flight is. Okay, let's move on to concealer. I think today's a concealer day. So I'm using the Revolution Pro Full Cover Camouflage Concealer in C1. This isn't my preferred concealer because it's quite thick, but I think today we might need something. See what I mean by it being a bit thick? It's quite hard to get out, but you'd only need the tiniest amount for both eyes. So they sent me off for the CT scan, and that was an adventure, but they didn't tell me anything there. And then I went off for the iron infusion, and the haematologist at the place where I had the iron infusion said to me, so have you noticed any rapid weight loss recently? And if any of you have been following me for any length of time, you'll know that between 2017 and midway through 2018, I lost 36 kilos. So I said, well, what do you mean the 36 kilos that I worked my butt off to try and lose? Yes, I've noticed some rapid weight loss. Oh, okay. That was a moment. There we go. Concealer is in place. So I had the iron infusion and started to feel a little bit better, and then the doctor called me back in with the results from the CT scan, and she said there was a shadow there was a small 7mm shadow in my left lung. There seemed to be a small shadow underneath my left nipple, and there seemed to be that was a bit of a concern. But she said, in order for us to go any further than that, you would need to be staying here for longer. So she said, my suggestion is go back to the UK, check in with your GP, get referred, and have a look at everything once you're back in the UK. So I arrived back I made an appointment then and there while I was in Australia to meet with my GP back here in the UK as soon as I landed, and got an appointment that was 2 days after we had arrived back. So the eyebrow pencil that I'm using is the NYX Professional Makeup Sculpt and Highlight Brow Contour. So I referred back to my GP, and he sent me off to the hospital, to the breast cancer clinic, on the basis that, given the results so far, the greatest chance was that what I had was breast cancer. And so I met with a lovely consultant in the breast cancer clinic at my local hospital, and she had a good old feel around and had a look at me and said that she couldn't feel anything that was wrong, but that she would refer me for an ultrasound and for the radiographer to have a closer look at me. So I went back and spoke to the radiographer, and she couldn't find anything. The shadow underneath my left nipple appeared to be nothing. The shadow on my lung appeared to be nothing. There were no lumps and bumps that seemed to be not in line with a woman of my age, which is 50, by the way. So it was all a bit confusing, and everyone was like, well, we don't know what's going on. So the breast cancer clinic then referred me through to the oncology clinic, and they ordered up a barrage of tests. Now, this might get a little bit too much information for you, so if you don't want to hear about the blood and guts and gauze and stuff, then I will put a little timestamp down here, and you can fast forward past this next bit because there's some graphic stuff in here. I hadn't, by this point, this was now the end of September, and I hadn't had a period since the beginning of July. And they said, okay, right, we'll keep these tests going. And my period started. And it was probably the worst period that I've ever had in my life. And it just started out really, really, really bad. And it got worse. And I managed to get through the Monday. And embarrassingly, I was at a client's house and sat down. And when I got up to go and sort out her computer, she said to me, have you noticed that you've got a red stain on your shirt? And we've all had that happen from time to time. I was like, okay, that's interesting. It turns out that I had actually stained one of her pieces of antique furniture. I was so embarrassed. But she's a really amazing lady. And she went, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's not a problem. I'll sort it. And everything was okay. So I said to my husband on the Tuesday, I'm going to contact the GP. I'm a bit concerned about this. He said, that sounds like a good idea. So I went down to the GP, spoke to her. She said, yes, there are drugs we can give you that will stop the bleeding. It'll all be fine. Go to the pharmacy. My GP has a pharmacy inside the GP surgery. She said, go to the pharmacy, collect this drug, start taking it, and it'll all clear up. So I was standing at the pharmacy to get the drugs that she'd prescribed for me. And I said to the pharmacist, I've just got to sit down for a few seconds. And I went and sat down. And the world was swimming. And a few minutes later, the pharmacist leaned out the window and she said to me, are you okay? And it was like I was sitting in the bottom of a swimming pool and someone was talking to me through the swimming pool. You know, that kind of muffled, all the world is just in the wrong place type sound. So she said, I'm going to call you a doctor. So they found one of the doctors who came over and had a look at me, and he said, you're not looking really good. We need to get you to somewhere where you can lie down. And they lifted me up and started to walk me through to where there was a bed that I could lie down on, and I collapsed. So they called an ambulance, and the ambulance came and picked me up and took me to hospital. And in hospital, they then decided to keep me in. And I was in hospital for 5 days. And they ended up transfusing 5 units of blood. So that's 5 Coke cans worth of blood. They then decided to give me a much harsher drug because they really needed to stop the bleeding. And it took 4 days before I stopped bleeding. And I was bleeding it was like I was bleeding to death. And I felt really awful. So I went back to the oncology unit and they gave me the results of the biopsies, and the biopsy breast cancer, it wasn't showing as breast cancer, and they were thoroughly confused. So they told me at this point that I had a cancer of unknown primary and that there were things that they were going to have to do, which involved sending the original biopsy was sent off for further tests. And sure enough, 2 weeks later when it came back, the cells presented themselves as breast cancer cells. So finally we had a diagnosis, and the full diagnosis is secondary breast cancer in the bone of unknown primary. This means that probably what happened is that at some stage I developed breast cancer and it went undetected. I didn't feel anything. All of the blood tests that they were doing for my diabetes didn't include looking for anything to do with cancer, so no one noticed it there. I was feeling run down, so I was given antidepressants. Oh, let's not go there. And at some stage, the cancer spread through my lymph node system and went into my bones. But probably what happened is that my immune system then went into overdrive and killed off wherever the original primary was. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. I am not curable, but I'm treatable. I've been placed on hormone therapy. The oncologist said to me, if you're going to get secondary breast cancer in the bone, you've got the best sort. Which is not very reassuring, but you work with what you've been given, really. And so I am on 2 hormone therapy drugs, one constantly, and then the other one I take in 3-week batches. So I have a week's break from it, unless they tell me otherwise. So I'm now on to month 5 of that treatment. I've had 2 CT scans since then. The second one was on Monday, so I haven't had the results. I won't get the results from that until next week. But the results from the first one was that the bone deterioration was no further progressed. So whatever the treatments are halting the cancer from continuing to eat away at my bones. And that some of the markers in my bloods have shown a reduction in the cancer. So they're actually halting the cancer from doing any further damage. So the simple answer is that I am responding to treatment. Should I continue to respond to treatment, I should live quite a long time. When I expressed my fears about all of that, the oncologist said to me that she has had lots and lots of people who have been receiving treatment from her for this type of cancer for decades. So as long as I continue to respond, and that's the big if, I have to keep responding to the treatment. If I keep responding to the treatment, then I should live to a ripe old age. If I stop responding to the treatment, there are alternative treatments that they can put me on. There are alternative hormones, and then if hormone therapy fails, then there are other treatments like chemo. So at the moment, we're going for the soft option. The hormone treatment is kinder to the body. So my treatment at the moment consists of these 2 pills, interspersed with ordinary painkillers. I have a stock of paracetamol that I have with me all the time. And I'm prescribed a heavy dose of codeine. Far higher dose of codeine than you can get over the counter. And I take those as and when I need them. So that's currently where we stand at the moment. Right, my next piece that I'm going to use. Again, while I was in Australia, I went into Mecca and I found this. This is a mineral powder, wet and dry powder foundation. It's called Blur Veil, and I've got the light to medium, which is actually just a tad dark for my purposes, but rather me using it as a foundation, I basically use it as a setting powder. I actually find that the light to medium is too dark for me. If I use it as a foundation, it makes me look as though I'm badly fake tanned. So where do we go from here? So there's a few things that have changed in my life. I'm being a lot more careful about what I lift and carry. Because obviously my back is, I now know why my back is hurting so much. And that's a revelation. I've stopped beating myself up for not being able to do things. Right, we're going to move on to bronzer. And I'm using my favourite bronzer, which is the MUA Bronze and Sculpt Contour Kit from MUA Luxe range. So yeah, I don't lift tables around at the village market anymore. I let people do that for me. I try not to carry things that are too heavy. I'm quite capable of wheeling something behind me. So bags with wheels on them are a fantastic invention for me. I am not doing as much housework, so my house is slowly getting worse. And then we've made some decisions as a family as to what we're going to do. We were already planning on emigrating back to Australia, but we were going to do it, sometime 2020. We've decided that we need to do that a little sooner rather than later. So we are now currently looking at moving back at the end of this summer, sometime in the autumn. So I'm kind of thinking September, October, maybe pushing into November. That's all kind of up in the air at the moment because obviously I'm still in the relatively early stages of ongoing treatment. So we're trying to get a routine built with that. We're almost there. We've got a 9-year-old who has to finish school for this year, year 4. We already had a holiday booked to Ireland and Northern Ireland for this summer, and we neither of us want to give that up because if Brexit goes through, then it may mean that travelling around Europe is harder. Still not impossible, but harder. We have things that we need to organise, like my daughter's citizenship, so that she doesn't have to live in Australia as an English person. She can live in Australia as an Australian. And it has to be done in 2 steps. For the first step is for us to apply for her citizenship, which is her right by birth, because she's my child. And then we have to apply for her Australian passport. My husband has to apply, because he's English, he has to apply to return to Australia as a returning resident. And that's, again, a case of some paperwork and a bit of money handed over. So it's not big, it's just things that need to be organised. And then we need to reduce the stuff that there's no need for us to take with us. Every household has stuff in it that you've stopped using or that is broken and needs to be got rid of. And we need to spend some concentrated time going through what we have and working out what we're never going to use again, what is completely surplus to requirements, and what we should take with us. And the general advice from various people who were involved in these things. We went to an immigration fair. It was mostly to ask about jobs and visas, and we discovered that both of those there was no point in us asking questions about either of those, because we didn't need to worry about visas. We weren't the sort of visa people that they were looking for, and where neither of us on the wanted list of jobs, IT is not one of those areas where Australia is desperate for people to go in. If you're a tradie and you want to move to Australia, now's a really good time, because there's a lot of need for that. Plumbers, electricians, builders, those sorts of things are all wanted. Doctors, nurses. I think everywhere in the world is looking for doctors and nurses. Firefighters. Oh, hang on, no. Firefighters has just come off the list. Yeah. But certainly not IT people. So we're planning on moving sometime later this year, once we've sorted out, we'll have to put the house on the market and do all of that sort of stuff. And things will be a little topsy-turvy for a while again. We'll move to Perth, and then we'll get back into another routine with medical appointments, etc., etc. Probably rent somewhere for a little while. And then once we've worked out what our routine is in Australia, then we'll be looking for a house to buy. So, I just forgot to tell you what I just used. So the blusher that I used is the MUA Luxe range, and it's now so worn out it doesn't have the name on the back of it anymore. But if you want to know which one that is, if you have a look through my videos, you'll see there is a review of the MUA Luxe range, and this is the blush that I used in that. For the highlighter, I used the Revolution Soph highlighter palette. Again, I have a video on the Soph palette, eye palette, the highlighter palette, and the 3 lipsticks. So you can have a look for that under on my channel. Okay, I've just gone away and I've done my eyeshadow, and I'm using the W7 Pretty Please palette that has just arrived on my doorstep. If you'd like to see what I think of this, then please keep a lookout for that video, which will be up shortly. So, getting back to the story. Now we're going to move into the future of where I see things going for this channel. I'm going to now use the NYX Professional Makeup Matte Liquid Liner. Now, I struggle with liquid liners. I'm 50. My eyelids are wrinkly, and liquid liners have a tendency to kind of go wherever they want to go. So I have a little technique that I use that I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope you'll be able to see what's going on. So what I do is as well as having my liquid liner in my hand, I have a very fine brush in my hand. This one is a very battered Real Techniques accent brush. But the smaller and finer you can get, the better for this technique. So one of the conclusions that I've come to is that life is short, and I don't know how much longer I've got. I'm being reassured that I've got probably a decade. Whether I've got much longer than that is yet to be seen. I gave the oncologist the charge that she had to help me see my daughter grow up to be an adult and become independent, and she said that's quite doable. So that's what I'm hoping for. But it's made me realise that I don't just want to stick to one thing. I mean, I do loads of things in my life, and I'm probably not going to be the sort of person who can hold down a job where I'm expected to stand for any length of time, or where I'm expected to lift anything now. So I need to accept that anything that I do is going to be fairly sedentary, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life working. So I'm kind of putting myself in a situation where I'm going to try and do things that bring me joy. Spend time with my family, both my immediate family and my family back in Australia. That's why we're moving back. So here we go. This is the technique. draw the line on just above the lashes, which requires me to stare down into the mirror. Don't look up straight away because otherwise you'll end up with eyeliner everywhere. Take your brush while it's still wet and just work that into the skin. Now it won't give you a wing, but I don't do wings. Sorry, can't talk for the left eye. There we go. Eyeliner on. Not bad, huh? Yeah, so I want to be spending time doing the various things, and I want to share that with as many people as I possibly can. So I do a lot of crafts. Some of you might want to go back into the history on this channel, and you'll see that I used to do stuff with duct tape. Don't do that anymore. Although I'm very popular with my friends because anytime they need duct tape, I've got the best collection ever. And I started doing probably about 5 years ago, I started making resin jewellery, or playing with resin generally, mostly in terms of making kind of steampunky type jewellery, which I sold at science fiction conventions and did okay out of it. And while the market for that has tapered off, and the major convention that I usually go to, EasterCon, which is in 2 weeks' time, I'm not going to be having a dealer's table because I don't want to spend my last EasterCon sitting at one table in one room for the entire weekend. I want to enjoy the convention. The setting spray that I'm using today is from Revolution, and it's the Hyaluronic Fix Hydrating and Plumping Makeup Fixing Spray. A lesson I've learnt: do your fixing spray before you put your mascara on. Even if you've got waterproof mascara, particularly the one I'm about to use, it takes ages for it to dry. So I'm going to start sharing some of the resin stuff that I've been doing. I've bought myself a digital vinyl cutter because it's kind of like once you get into one thing, you can get into another, and it goes down this little rabbit hole, and you kind of find yourself doing all sorts of things. So I've been putting my name in vinyl on just about everything. I've been personalizing a whole bunch of stuff. I've been making t-shirts. I was making things cut out of things cut out of vinyl and putting them under resin, and all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm going to start sharing some of that information with you, and as I come across tools that have me curious, I figured they might have you curious, so I may buy those and do something with those as well. We have to see how things go. Right, the mascara that I'm going to use is the waterproof mascara from Oxx Studio. Again, this is a Kmart brand, and I bought this while I was on holiday in Australia. This mascara takes forever to dry. So just so that you're aware of that. what that means in terms of everything in general for my life is that because of the various treatments and things that I'm undergoing and my energy levels, the energy levels are the hardest thing at the moment. I find myself on some days really, really wiped out. If the various drugs and things that I'm having stop me from sleeping from time to time. So I have days where I'm exhausted even before I've started the day. I try to kind of measure my day out so that if I know I've got to do something later on in the day, I try and take it easy at the beginning of the day. I am back onto caffeinated coffee because I find that there are times where I just need that little pick-me-up. So the lipstick that I'm using today is from Soph, from Revolution, and I'm using the colour Cake. But with the lack of energy, that means that there may be some days where I just can't get a video going. So what I may find is that I'm kind of batch processing videos. That's kind of what I'm doing today. It may just take me some time to get a video up, so I don't think I can stick to any particular video schedule, as it were. I was never very good at it. Oh God, have I just creased my mascara? A little. See, this is what I mean. The mascara takes forever to dry. Oh wow, that's completely screwed that up. How do we fix this? Right, so what I do to fix this is I put a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of foundation on to the end of a makeup sponge. This one happens to be dry. And I pat that into place. Then I take my small fine tip brush again, dip that into the darkest brown that I've used on my eyeshadow. And I think I'll leave it at that. Oh, so where was I? So what I'm planning to do, yeah, I will try and do things that might possibly earn me some money, but they might not. I'm stopping stressing about money, which probably doesn't help the other half all that well. Love you, honey. But I want to do things that add quality to my life, and I want to share as much of my life with the people around me, the people that I love, you guys. And I don't want to be all hung up on the day-to-day routine because I don't know how much time I've got. And I'm hoping that it's going to be a long time. I'm working hard to make sure that it's as long as possible. Ironically, I've been told to not diet, so I have unfortunately put on some of the weight that I had lost. But I'm trying to be a little more careful about what I eat so that I'm trying to eat as healthily as possible. So that's where we are, and that's why I've been gone. It's kind of rambled for a bit, but you've got the full story. I hope that this has been useful. If you've got any questions about what it is that I'm going through, I'm more than happy to answer them. So please comment below and I will answer your questions, because we need to talk about cancer as much as possible, because it's important that that conversation is ongoing. One of the things that I found is, you know how when you buy a car and you think, oh, I've bought something really unusual and interesting, and then you get onto the road and you suddenly notice that there's a whole bunch of other cars that are exactly the same as the one you're driving. Well, the same is true of cancer and of almost any other disease that you come across. As soon as you start sharing with the world that you've got a form of cancer, there's so many people who say, open up and say, oh yes, I've had that too. There's a couple of things that I need you to know so that you don't say them. Don't do them. One of the worst things that you can say to somebody who has a form of cancer that is not curable is, oh, well, you know, I had a friend such and such, they had breast cancer and they're fine now. They've been clear for 5 years. That's great. They had primary breast cancer. I have secondary breast cancer in the bone. Once cancer goes to your bone, at this point in time, there is no cure. The cancer basically degrades the quality of the bone, and there is nothing that can be done to bring that bone back. There are things that they can do to strengthen what bone is there, and they are giving me that treatment. So that is useful to know and useful for me personally. The other thing to remember is that cancer is a disease where it's the body's own system turning in on itself. So we don't necessarily see it as, our own immune system doesn't necessarily see it as a bad thing, because the cancer cells were produced by our own body, and therefore the immune system accepts that those cancer cells are legitimately supposed to be there. But because it's our own cancer cells, our own body producing these cancer cells, each cancer is unique from one individual to another. There are things that they know help various different types of cancer. So I am on 2 hormones that they know help this particular type of cancer. But because this particular type of cancer in me is unique to me, how I respond to that treatment is also going to be unique. So my form of secondary breast cancer in the bone could be the same form of secondary breast cancer as in someone else. But, and I know this for a fact, their system may not respond as well as mine is currently responding, and therefore their life expectation is shorter. Or alternatively, their body is responding better to the treatment than mine is, and so therefore their life expectancy, their prognosis, is going to be better than mine. We don't know. We don't know how I'm going to respond. Telling me that they find new cures for cancer all the time also doesn't help me, because there are so many things that those cures have to go through before they get to me. My mother-in-law had multiple sclerosis, and unfortunately it meant that she passed away at 72. But in the 30 years since she was first diagnosed, treatments for MS have gone on in leaps and bounds. So people who are being diagnosed with MS, even 10 years ago, are getting better treatments than my mother-in-law got 30 years ago, because that's the way it goes. So there may be treatments that are being discovered every day for my form of cancer, but depending on how I respond, I may never benefit from those treatments. So you telling me that there's these new treatments coming up every other day might not be helpful, might not be useful for me. And I know it's hard. You want to say something that will make me feel better. I appreciate that, and I love you for wanting to do that. So thank you, and I will try and take any of those comments on board in the light that you are intending them. But don't be offended if I then get upset with you. A friend of mine posted this marvellous thing that I've got messages coming in from family. I need to go and have a look at them in a minute. She posted this lovely picture, And it was a series of concentric circles. And in the center of the circle was my name. The second circle was my husband's and my daughter's names. Then the third circle was my close family and friends. And then in the fourth circle was all my other friends. And then in the outer circle was everybody else. And what she said was that the way this circle works is anyone who is on an inner circle is allowed to dump outside of that circle. But anyone who is on the outside circle is not allowed to dump inwards. So I'm allowed to dump on my husband, probably not my daughter, and out the following circles as much as I like, because I'm the one in the center. My husband and my daughter are allowed to dump on people on the outer circles, but they're not allowed to dump on me. My immediately close family and friends are allowed to dump on my outer circle of friends and other people, but they're not allowed to dump on my husband and my daughter, and they're not allowed to dump on me. And that's actually a really useful image. If I can draw up that image, I will try and put it here to help you. That's actually a really good thing for anyone that you know who is suffering from some form of chronic or terminal illness. Just remember that they're in a tender moment all the time, and you need to hold them. So this has been a very long video, and it's all been very deep and meaningful and all of that. I hope it's helped you. I hope it helps you understand why I've been gone. I hope it helps you understand why I may not be the most regular uploader. It's kind of a continuation of my Judi's Journey diabetes videos, so I will add it into that playlist, and you can go back and see my medical history as much as you want to. And I hope it's useful for you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. If you want to see what I thought of this eyeshadow that I've just done on, then please have a look at the W7 palette review that's coming up. I wish you all the best. Love you lots and lots. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Really like interacting with you guys because it just makes my life so much more fun, and I'm having a great time playing with videos. So this one's going to take some fantastic editing. I will talk to you again soon, and keep yourself well, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye!